Let's go to the Rude guest hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. And let's get to the bottom of some of the moving and shaking the Commanders have been doing over the last few days with Ben Standing of The Athletic, who covers the team. Ben, we will start with the news of the day, and that is the release of Jonathan Allen. Not necessarily a surprise, but when did it become pretty clear this was the way they were going? And why do you think they didn't feel like he was worth keeping around and maybe not making the $16.5 million in cap space that they created by releasing him?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking back at some of my notes and stories from last year, and I was already talking then about John Allen is possibly playing on the last year of his deal. You know, he had this large cap number, 22 million on the cap, basically, and not even so much because they drafted Johnny Newton, though. You know, that's notable, but that's a huge number. He's going to have to, he hadn't been playing well enough at that point to justify those figures. Now, I know it's $15 million salary, but going into the last year, he's going to want a new deal. Just like we talk about with like coaches or some other key players. Like, hey, I think I've put in my time. I think I've done a good job. Why aren't we doing an extension? And I think this group who didn't draft John Allen, who didn't sign with the last extension, were like, you know what? We'd rather have use that money elsewhere. And look, he also had the injury last year, which I can't ding him for. Things happen, but ultimately, they just weren't getting from the money, and I don't think they wanted to commit multiple years beyond this if they're going to give him an extension.
How far away from the level? This question probably won't make any sense, and I'm sure I'll have to rephrase it, man. I'm going to do my best. How far away from the level of worth it was his play last year? In other words, if he was a Pro Bowler, if he was a star, I don't think you'd think twice. Maybe you would, but you know what I mean? Like, this now seemed to go in the no-brainer category. Wasn't that he was bad, but it wasn't going to be 22 mil worth, right? How far away from that level was he in your mind?
Well, I probably look at it like this. It's sometimes hard, as we know, to sort of identify one player when you're talking about a 4-player line and 11 on defense and all these things. Washington was 30th in the run against the run last year, and they were bad whether John was in the lineup or not. They were not getting this done. And again, I'm not putting it all on him, but if you're one of those defensive tackles that's a true game record that the other team really has to focus on, I don't know how much that's happening too often. And look, Daron Payne could easily have been the guy instead of Allen, except that his contract goes for 2 more years, and that's the rub. His cap hit is would be a huge penalty for them, whereas John Allen actually saved $16 million. So, look, you look at this defense as a whole. I don't think any of us are going, you know what, bring them all back. That thing worked last year. And, again, not pinning it on one guy or Allen, but, the way the collective worked, I just don't think there was enough there. Also, like, he had 9.5 sacks, I want to say, in 2021. His sack totals and his QB hits went down each of the next 2 years. Obviously, last year he missed half the season. That's going to be lower. But, the numbers were declining as well. So, put it all together with the new staff, and so I think that's just kind of what happened.
Ben Standing of The Athletic. Daron Payne has not played up to his contract either. They need more out of him. Johnny Newton was only a rookie, but I thought was okay, but they certainly are going to need him to make a leap. Maybe some thoughts on that. But then also, is D tackle suddenly a position that they could spend money at again, or that they may need to go get, as I like to call him, a smart car who can take on blocks and help clog things up? Or do you think they just kind of go forward with Sheldon Day types behind their starters?
I think it's definitely conceivable that they added defensive tackle, maybe even in the draft. I mean, this is considered, as I'm sure you guys have discussed, a very strong draft on the defensive line. I've heard some people say tackle is even better than edge. And, look, if Daron Payne is going to be in the John Allen position next year, then we'll be talking about Daron Payne just getting released unless he has a significantly better year. So they're going to possibly need another defensive tackle anyway. I know that they have gone through a litany of defensive tackles. Let's not forget Fedarian Mathis was a recent pick, but yeah, I mean, basically if Payne and Newton were to play 70% of the snaps, which is, sort of in line with tackles, then that's obviously like 60% that's still out there between the two spots. So, they could justify adding another player, one where, whether it's more of a high profile guy or a first or second round pick. I don't think that's crazy at all. I mean, right now they only have 4 defensive linemen total on the roster, more or less. So they're going to get
Sorry,
What's
buddy.
that?
That's my fault. I cut you off. Ben Standing of The Athletic with us here on G&D. I want to ask you about Wagner coming back. I'm a fan of it. I think it's the right thing to do. I'd love to be in a position at some point in the not too distant future where I don't need my 35-year-old that's, obviously not as good as he was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, even though he's a Hall of Famer, to come back. But I think they are in that position where they needed to have him. But your general reaction to Wagner returning?
Yeah, look, I mean, you mentioned the age. There's obviously some decline in terms of just like this overall like athletics, ability, speed, pass coverage, things like that. But the instincts are really, really honed and sharp, and he can make up for any athletic decline by understanding what's about to come. He teaches the others on defense what he's seeing. The other guys on defense and the whole team follow his lead when it comes to work and things like that. So the intangibles ultimately outweighed the any potential downside. I don't think linebacker is a position that definitely want to spend money on in free agency, and you can't just go find another Bobby Wagner in terms of what he can bring to the table. So unless you wanted to go out and spend legit money on like a Nick Bolton, who's a free agent, who is a guy I like, but then you're probably not really getting much of a difference maker. I think the hope has got to be though that Jordan McGee, who was basically banged up most of this year, he's able to play and able to show something when called upon, so they can feel better about him possibly being the replacement plan for 26. But yeah, I mean, for now, Bobby Wagner is a big need, or a big hole filled. And also, look, he's got that big brother, little brother bond with Jayden Daniels, and anything you can do to help the quarterback, you do. And keeping Bobby Wagner does that, then it's the right move.
Can they be a great run stopping team with him at Mike linebacker? If his speed subsides even more this year.
It's a great question. I try to watch the film, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend I can tell you exactly where all the holes are. You would like to think that if the defensive tackle, the defensive line in general, did their work, or a force of resistance there at the line, then that makes Wagner's job a lot easier. I don't think that was happening though. Last year, I remember looking late in the season when they just kept giving up, all these huge rushing games to teams. I saw some stats that basically they were like dead last in the league in yards going to the edge, and then simultaneously they were also around like dead last when it came to yards before contact. So before anybody's even getting to the guy, the running back is already down the field, and that's where the lack of resistance up front is why they've got to get more help on the edge to be not just for a pass rusher, but to be a firm presence there. So yeah, obviously there's got to be some concern with Wagner, but he's going to need the defensive line to help his cause. If not, then yeah, there could be some concerns for sure.
So again, devil's advocate here, Ben. I am a fan of the signing. I think it was the right thing to do. It makes perfect sense to me. I think it's not about what he doesn't do, but about what he does. But at the same time, we're talking about this. They couldn't stop the run, and I argued that the pass defense was every bit as weak, if not more so, and they had to overcompensate for that. And that kind of led to maybe them willing to give up 5, 6, 7, 8 yards before contact in a lot of cases, just so they didn't give up a lot through the air. But that said, what would you say to somebody that goes, why are we in such a hurry to bring back a guy from a terrible defense that couldn't stop anything? Shouldn't we be looking to upgrade there? What would you say to a person like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you just have to look at everything look at the entire board for them. Other than quarterback, you could justify anything to me that they should do. Sign any position, draft any position. I can absolutely make an argument for it because it's such a weird dynamic. They make the NFC Championship game. It feels like they're on the rise, which I'm not saying they're not, but half the team is missing. And they still, like even last year, there's no other obvious strength on this team, right? It's not like you can say, hey, the defensive line is this, and maybe it's McLaurin and Samuel, but we got to see on that. And so when you look at that, then you figure out that, hey, they only have 3 draft picks in the top 205 right now. Maybe they'll trade out of the first round to get some more, but they only have right now 3 picks. 3 of them are in the top 79, so that's good. But if those 3 picks are used on, say, an edge, an offensive tackle, and let's say a cornerback, and you can't address the other stuff. And I think those things are more important right now than the middle linebacker. I'm not dismissing the middle linebacker. I'm just saying those other positions are more core needs. So filling in the 1-year gap here, so to speak, if that's the way it plays out for Wagner, 1 more year, this way I think makes more sense for using your assets than it would be to spend big at middle linebacker rather and go less at some of those other key positions. So that's kind of how I would look at it. And again, Wagner's intangibles are just, pretty off the charts. And, they just got to get more personnel around him.
How would you feel, Ben, about trading for Trey Hendrickson, and what do you think it might take?
So I've been same with Myles Garrett. I've been on the no trade team, not because obviously fantastic players, but it's twofold here. Look, they're on this they've got this short window with Jayden Daniels still in the rookie contract for a couple more years at least, and the momentum from last year, and obviously those players would fill that edge defender gap that they desperately have to have, but they're going to cost you draft picks, and this team's only had one draft under Adam Peters. Again, we because Jayden Daniels covers up so much, they really don't. They're not a young team. I mean, they were one of the oldest teams in the league last year.
Yeah.
Other than Jayden Daniels, Sanders Still, Quan Martin, it's hard to point to too many guys right now who are young and say, "Wow, there's your core of their team."
They
maybe
were the
Johnny
oldest
Newton
playoff team, by the way, Ben.
Right. So, look, maybe Johnny Newton and Brandon Coleman are officially clear starters going forward. And, I think they were both fine this year, but we'll see where things go. So I think they just have to get more draft picks. So I get it, but because they're missing half a roster right now, I just don't think they're like that one guy away. And if I'm Adam Peters, I'm just not trading away my first round pick.
Let me ask you this: if you found out, in 2 hours, that they gave up this year's 2 and next year's 3, so now they have a first. They basically are down to 5 picks. And they pick twice in the top 205 or whatever the number would be at that point. But they get Hendrickson for a 2 this year and a 3 next year. Would you say, okay, I wouldn't have done that, but I think it's a pretty good move? Or what would your reaction be?
Yeah, probably something like that. Look, it's not like I don't want to have fun. I mean, obviously it would be a lot more fun.
But also there's the element of they have not had a guy like that. You saw Dexter Manley, I didn't. They have not had a 15+ sack, tackle for loss, quarterback hit maven. They've had some good edge rushers like Kerrigan and Marco Coleman in a year of LeVar, but they haven't had that all pro DPOY number 2.
Yeah, look, again, there's no doubt about it. That would be a huge addition to this team. It would be something they would need. And, when you get those premium players, in theory, they make everybody around them better because you're going to have to send double teams their way or put more attention. And that would give, Dorrance Armstrong or Frankie Louvu maybe a little bit more one-on-one scenarios where they can beat their guy. No argument. But, look, it's hard to just say, well, look ahead to, 2 years from now, then what? Again, they've only had the one draft. We'll see how some of these other guys play out. Look, Ben Sinnott and Luke McCaffrey, I don't know what to make of them yet. Not saying they're bad or they're bust or anything like that, but I don't know. I mean, so you've got to build up more of these things. I mean, this is not just a one-year deal. Ultimately, for me, it's about Jayden Daniels, and you want to build with him. And they just don't have a lot of guys right now who are going to grow with him because they've only had the one draft. Unfortunately, for Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, the Ron Rivera drafts were mostly busts, as we know. So they just don't have a young baseline to work with. And ultimately, if I'm them, I don't want to be looking up in 3 years going, wait a minute, we have Jayden Daniels and everybody else on our team is, getting AARP magazines, So I would pass, but if they did it, I wouldn't be like, wow, that's a major overpay. It's just sort of how would you build your team?
Ben, what's your reaction to this? The Danny Rouillet or the Danny Peters plan depends on which one you want to call it. I would do this. I would make sure that Mikey Sanders still goes back to what I drafted him to do, which is play slot corner. I'm hoping Marshawn Lattimore plays better than he did last year. I'd like to re-sign Igbenogany, but who knows if he'd be willing to do that as a 4th corner, maybe 5th. And then I'm going to go to the one spot that looks decent in free agency, which is the cornerback spot. Maybe I'll win the bidding for a Traveris Ward or a DJ Reed or a Carlton Davis or somebody like that. That's something that I would do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all. I mean, again, at the moment, the only corners they have are Lattimore and Sanders still. They've got to get pure depth at a minimum. And then, the question is, where is Sanders still playing? I would agree with you. I would put him inside. I kind of imagine that's what their plan would be, but obviously he showed that he could play outside. And then in order to get one of those types of corners, it's not it shouldn't be just a minimum salary or a late round pick. It should be a decent investment, whether that's a 2nd or a 3rd round pick, or as you said, there's some guys in free agency that could be fun. Ward, Adam Peters obviously had Ward in San Francisco, and that would be sort of on the high end thing. I'm not going to say that they're definitely going to spend on one of the top names in free agency, or but like I wouldn't be surprised if they did. And so if they end up saying it's Ward, and maybe his salary doesn't get too high coming off some injuries and a little bit of a down year, maybe that's the case. But I wouldn't have an issue with that, especially look in the division that they're in, right? I mean, you got AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. The Giants have Malik Neighbor. Dallas has CeeDee Lamb. We'll see what else they do at receiver. So, you've got to have, against the teams you're playing the most, you're going to get, you've got to have good corners. So I wouldn't have an issue with that. Plus, like with Lattimore, if things did go sideways this year, they could get out of his contract next year easily. So having the hedge at a minimum wouldn't be bad, let alone a guy who can actually start right away.
Ben Standing of The Athletic. All right, I want your prediction. If Washington does one of the two things that I'm about to give you, which one do you think they'll do? An elite corner or a top-of-the-line edge?
I heard Logan say top-of-the-line edge, and I'm never going to disagree with Logan Paulson. So I would say that, but I also think that, to me, just makes the most sense. The thing about the line that I just, to this day, I just think too many people just don't quite grasp. The line on either side of the ball makes everybody else better, right? You get a pass rusher who gets the quarterback off his mark, gets him on the run, gets him down. You can have lesser cornerbacks, and same thing like a receiver. You don't have to have the greatest receivers if you have a Jayden Daniels at corner. So as much as at quarterback, so as much as I would think they need a corner, I think it's no question edge, and I think that Adam Peters is going to feel the same way.